Okay. No, that's the other one. Wrong way. Okay. We're still good on time. So, what did I talk about? I talked about this. Yes. So, testing automation is still hard for documentation because unlike code, prose is harder to compile neatly into binaries. So a lot of the tools out there are more aimed for uncovering problems rather than, let's say, fixing them for you. And it's a lot trickier when you're talking about, linguistic grammar and syntax. So I would be happy to hear if anybody's working on cool things. Especially, there are solutions for things like that, but not so many open source ones. Okay, so I'm only talking about open source stuff here. So for example, I literally last week found out that one of my good friends from KDE project, they built a tool that aims to do just one job, which is testing code blocks in Markdown files. Okay, you can run it locally, you can run it in, you can put it in your build sequence, and it basically runs code blocks from Markdown files in a shell. Okay, so which shell it is depends on your system, and it just validates that whatever you have in your code blocks works. Now, I know for restructured text and ASCII-Doc and the more robust markup languages, there are tools for this. There's doc testers. You can dynamically embed code blocks in your topics. But a lot of projects still use Markdown, right? So this is a quick and easy way to do this, and people can extend it, and it's open source, and you can look at it later. The next one is, of course, the trusty Hemingway app, which will help you. If you copy and paste some text into it, it can highlight some things that are a little bit flowery and probably not so concise. Unfortunately, it works best in smaller chunks of text, so you probably don't want to feed a 500-page manual into it. But this is an example of the things that it can do, right? So if you want to get more robust, this is where things get a little bit harder. So this is a test automation framework for documentation for English or translated prose. There are non-open source solutions for this, which I'm not going to mention, but this is a tool that my colleagues at Red Hat Content Services are working on. It's free, it's open source, and it's called Emender. And you basically feed your style guide into it and feed your grammatical conventions to it. And of course, you will be faced with the question, how much do I invest in test automation versus how much value I get out of it? But that's something that you're already dealing with these questions when you're coding. So this is another thing that you can consider. And the last thing I want to talk about, before I get to the questions part, is the community spirit. So when I joined Red Hat, when I moved, I'm from Israel, now I live in Prague. And when I started traveling around, especially Python and Django, and then write the docs, I realized that there's a lot of things that we can do when we collaborate. And one of the great things about working in open source is that there's a lot of that spirit of collaboration. And I mean, I drank the Kool-Aid. I'm all in it. And it's really, really wonderful. And I'm happy that I get to come here and talk to a lot of people from different roles. And there's a lot of things that we can do to be more welcoming to contributors and to more users, whether it's from documentation or code or whatever it is to our project. Okay, so it's not just about the code, it's not just about developers, it's about, the community. Okay, so, docs or it didn't happen. Repeat after me, docs or it didn't happen. Let's try this again. Docs or it didn't happen. Thank you very much. This is not just yes. This doesn't work at every conference. This is why I like this community. Okay? Documentation as a deliverable, as a requirement. Docs or it didn't happen is not just a funky tagline. It means give me docs or I'm not accepting your patch. Okay? Django project does this, Linux kernel, OpenStack, a lot of different projects do this. And I mean, yes, you should actually enforce this, obviously, but having it documented on your contribution guidelines is a good start because you're saying this is an official thing, this is a policy, okay? You make documentation contributions into your code contribution policies, okay? Step number one. And now that you've made it into your policy, how are you going to help people learn how to contribute? So you write contribution guidelines, okay, and give them help. Who will doc the docs, you know? So how to doc the docs. This is something we did for NixOS a few years ago. There's a lot of different projects who have this kind of thing, and I will talk about this in a second. And so, of course, you want to give them also templates, right? Code templates, you know, a lot of people copy and paste things. And why not have this for your documentation as well? This is a relatively, this is on the Write the Docs website, and I'm pretty sure we've gotten the most hits is on this page, okay, the README template. And so whether you're just doing a small README or whether you're doing a much bigger doc set, then templates are great. There are many out there. One of the latest things that I've come across is something we're doing at Red Hat, which is called the Modular Docs project. So if you're looking at, I mean, this is a very small README, it's very cute, but if you want to do a documentation plan, okay, or if you want to actually build a strategy for something that will scale, okay, it's worth checking out this project because it gives you, we have a reference guide where you can read all about, you know, what is modular documentation. And when I say modular documentation, I mean small content chunks that are reusable, movable, and you can assemble them in different ways. The terminology is actually not the most critical part here. You can call them modules, you can call them topics. It doesn't matter. The point is, this is a free and open source project that we encourage communities to use, okay? And you can understand things like, you know, and this is based on the topic-based architecture, which breaks down topics into concept, task, reference, which is fairly standard in the tech writing world. But what I like about this is we have templates, okay? So there are templates here for any kind of, for the most part, the most common documentation types that you will need. And if you, this is just a raw output of the procedure template. So this is a module, and it tells you, you know, it gives you suggestions for naming conventions, and it also gives you things like, you know, start each step with an active verb, and all sorts of things like that, include one command. So it gives you best practices on how to write a task topic. And I know people still struggle with this because it's not a lot of engineers, a lot of people who are not writers, you know, just like people have developed a skill set in writing code, you know, I have developed a skill set in writing docs, you know, and it's not something, you know, a lot of people ask me, you know, how do I write documentation if I'm not going to change careers now? And you don't have to do this because we put out some best practices, thankfully, and some templates. So these resources are available. And then the last thing I want to talk about before I get into the questions is, like I said, we are surrounded by humans. We work with humans, whether it's remotely or in person. And the personal connections and the social aspect of working in open source community is much more felt when you're talking about documentation, because it's all about communication, right? So I want to talk about Write the Docs because it's one of the happiest communities that I have been very fortunate to be a part of. This year we have 5 conferences. We've been around for 6 years. I joined 5 years ago. We have conferences in Portland and in Prague. Those are our main conferences. And we have new conferences. Well, Australia is in the 3rd year already. We have Cincinnati last year, collaboration with Open Help. And we have a new one this year in Vilnius in June. And this is the place where you go and learn about, you know, way more things than I talked about today. Like this presentation is kind of hopefully to inspire you to think a little bit differently, but also to tease you to want to learn more about this, okay? About the documentation world, about content, about collaboration, okay? About communication. So this is my home, and I'm really happy to be there. And the other thing that I do is I come to these conferences. I've done this in the past at Django Under the Hood, and I've been running documentation sprints. So, you know, next time you go to any kind of Python, Django, or any kind of open source event, you know that writers walk among you. And we are here. And we might not be the majority at these events, but we do try to get to a wider range of of open source and technical events to be able to collaborate. So I'm not just inviting you to come to my home at Write the Docs. I'm also telling you that we are among you, and it's probably good if you're nice to us, because we might write some docs for you. I do want to give a shout out for Season of Docs. If you know Summer of Code, then it's like this, but for docs. And they're doing it this year for the first time. The application period is open now, and open source projects can apply. And then you can get writers for free to do things for you, and you can get paid, and the writers can get paid, and it's like a mentorship, and you can get help for open source projects that you would not have otherwise gotten in the documentation area. So Google Season of Docs is a cool thing that they're doing now. Okay, we're good. All right, so I have 10 more minutes. I want to start with a few questions that I got in advance. Okay, I've been tweeting like hell in the last couple of weeks asking for some questions, and I have crowdsourced, anonymized, and non-weaponized questions. I do not accept weaponized questions. We may not have time for the microphone stuff, okay, but the online things could happen. Hopefully they are non-weaponized as well. I mean, if you ask me a weaponized question, you better be prepared to deal with the answer. This is why I don't take questions. Okay, so the first question is about, it has to do with grammar, syntax, and linguistics. And the question was, do you see benefits in using or avoiding pronouns in docs? And then later we've kind of elaborated or clarified that it's also a matter of gerunds and infinitives. Property X allows you to do Y versus property X allows for doing Y. And do you have any recommendations on which version makes more sense or it's more appropriate? So there's a few examples that we were iterating on Twitter until I understood what the question was. But the answer to all of that is minimalism, okay? Which means use fewer words. And one of the first things that I was taught when I became a technical writer is you have to keep it really, really simple, okay? And even more simple than you think. And not as in, the topics that we write about are so complicated sometimes that the language has to be extremely simple. So these are things that, for example, so if we're looking at the examples that the question was listing, so property X allows you to do Y, property X allows for doing Y, with X one can do Y, with X doing Y is possible, with X it's possible to do Y. You do Y with X, okay? Or you do X with Y, sorry, because the X comes first. So why am I flipping all of this into you do X with Y? This is a minimalistic approach. Okay, and even if before it was called minimalism, and you can Google minimalism, right? So you, second voice, I have notes. Second voice, you, in the relevant context, okay? So you are addressing the user or the reader directly, okay? This is what we try to do as persona-based documentation. So you're not saying, you know, administrators can do that. We want to make sure that we are addressing the user directly as much as possible. Okay, and then the second reasoning for this is that things cannot allow humans to do things. It's the same way, it's anthropomorphism. I think I'm pronouncing it right. It's a really long word. But it's basically giving human attributes to inanimate objects, and I see this happen a lot. So things like a software or a tool cannot allow you to do something. You use the tool to do something. Okay, so we flipped the way we think about it, and it's action-based, goal-based, user-based. The other side tangent, I have very few side tangents in this presentation. I'm quite proud of myself. Things cannot have things, okay? This tool cannot have attributes. It includes, it can describe, it does things. Software cannot own possessions. Also, have is a really dangerous word. Anyway, active voice indicates the goal first and the method second. So if we're looking at goal-oriented wording. And then gerunds, which is anything that ends with ing, doing, streaming, browsing, writing, are grammatically ambiguous and hard to translate sometimes. So if you have probably sometimes if it's in the middle of the sentence, it could have different ways to slice the sentence. But generally, using gerunds is best avoided in regular sentences. So unless you have a title, for example, that says, installing this tool, okay? A gerund is fine because it indicates a continuous action and it's not ambiguous. Okay, so you have to use gerunds very carefully. So that was the linguistic question that I got. The second theme, I got a few questions that are actually related, and I'm going to have, there's a lot of text here. So I got a project, I know I need docs, I can write, but I know it's not my strength. What do I need to do to make it easier for someone who does have those skills to contribute? When starting a project from scratch, how does one figure out how to structure the documentation and what are the first N things one should take care of? It's very hard for someone to write documentation for a project if they don't know how the project works. How do you best facilitate that knowledge transfer other than, of course, writing docs? How do you bootstrap the process? I don't know what I don't know, so how can I possibly know what you don't know? That's a really good question. And I have to say, not everybody has enough awareness to even ask this question, okay? So I thank you for all these questions. And they are all related because the answer is you have to talk to people. Sorry, you know? I talk to people all day. This is my job. I understand that it's not everyone's job to talk to people all day. But this is something that would be the easiest way to solve things would be to talk to people. So if I take the first question, you know, how do I get people who might have documentation skills to contribute to the project? So here's a few tips, okay? Find people with writing experience, as in, you know, I said we walk amongst you. Or you can do some calls to action. You find people with writing experience or who are interested in it. Ask them to test your software, okay? And then figure out what kind of workflow they're using. Ask them to give you feedback. And then help you build contribution guidelines, okay? Another thing that I think is great, KDE project does this, and I don't know how many other projects are doing it, I just recently learned about it, is that if you have a easy pickings or junior jobs flag in your issue tracker, they attach a mentorship to this. So it's not enough to say that something is easy, right? Because easy is a subjective thing. Please remember this. What's easy for you might not be for someone else, especially if they're new. So attaching a mentorship to the easy pickings issues can help bring people in to your project. So it could help, it can bring in new contributors who can fix your docs but might not necessarily have programming experience. Hello? Or even have experience with your project, you know? My favorite, well, my least favorite admission is self-documented code is code that you wrote recently. So, I mean, even if so at Red Hat, most of our users are developers, but they didn't write the stuff that they're using. You know, this is another perspective that you can put in. And the other thing is you can facilitate skill sharing sprints. So for example, if you invite writers to your developer sprint, and then you do some kind of pair hacking or, you know, some kind of collaborations, where, let's say, if I'm a writer, I can learn more about your project, and then I can help you contribute. I did this for PyBee. I did this with a lot of different projects. And I think it was quite well, because then you can take what you learn and you can implement it later. So the second question for that was how to structure the documentation, okay? So there's a couple of things you can do. First of all, I already talked about things like templates and the Modular Docs project and figure out how to store your content to scale. But you got to ask, quote unquote, potential users how their workflow, how do they actually use your tool, okay? And then from that common set of tasks that people want to achieve with your tool, you can port that back to your documentation. So in a similar way that in bigger enterprise projects, we collaborate with the QA testing teams. So they build test plans, and then we leverage that to make documentation. So it's a similar thing, whatever you're testing, more than unit tests. So I'm talking end-to-end testing. And then you can also research best practices and templates. There are more resources out there for that. And then these last two questions are basically the same. I love this. I don't know what I don't know, so how can I possibly know what you don't know? And that is a great question. And accepting that you have a problem is the first step in solving that problem. So just by admitting, okay, and understanding that different people have different starting points in their knowledge, and just because they don't know what you already know, that doesn't mean they don't know anything, okay? So they might know different things. So reach out to your peers, make yourself available for training and for mentorship, and be kind to the people who want to contribute, because welcoming projects get more contributors, okay? And that is something that I've seen in a lot of different places, and this is part of why I'm still involved in Django and Python communities, because you have been extremely welcoming to me, even though I do not write code at all, okay? And you've embraced the different skill sets that are needed to create better software in an open source way, and this is why I'm still here. So if you want to bring more people into your projects, be nice to them. I know. And then the last thing I want to say is, most or a good percentage of technical writers or documentation-oriented people, such as myself, and many peers that I have who are extremely talented writers, we do not have a deeper understanding of how your code is written, okay? But the strategic communication and the ability to see things on the bigger picture can help your project. So you should respect that, and you should embrace that in a collaborative way. And we have, I think, maybe a few more minutes for more questions. What's happening on Slack? Oh, time is up. Wait, can we take, like, where's our file? Okay, do we have, like, a non-weaponized question from Slack? And then, so I will just say that if people ask questions on Slack, I will read it later, and I will answer them personally later. So if we don't get to it now, I will answer it later.
There's a question about having not much time. If you have a software project that doesn't have any docs and you have little time, where do you start? What's the single most important thing to document or to write?
README. Easy. README, you can base it on the template from Write the Docs or something like that, and you have just enough information. It could be a paragraph, okay? It could take you like a couple hours just to understand what the basics of the project is. Just start with the README.
Okay, I think the other questions are best left to be answered on Slack then later.
Yeah, probably. Okay, let's write some docs. And let's drink some coffee.
Talk before we get to lightning talks and the onslaught of puns. Before we do, a couple of quick announcements. Those of you who are particularly towards the back, we can hear you at the front when you're talking really quietly. So the sound echoes really, really well. So if you have some ultra urgent thing you need to speak about, please move outside so you're not interrupting everybody at the front and on the stage. Secondly, if you're enjoying the Djangocon Europe experience, maybe you should try a different Djangocon. Djangocon US currently has its call for papers open, as does Djangocon Australia, which is also tied to another conference, PyCon Australia. So you get a 2 for 1. PyCon Australia is in the first week of August. Djangocon US is in the second last week of September, I think. Check the websites. All the details for the call for papers are open there. I highly recommend that you go to them because they are great events, almost as good as Djangocon Europe. Anyway, without further ado, I would like to invite our next speakers to the stage. We have a pair of speakers on this one, Kira and Sky. Talking about pen testing Django applications. Everyone, please welcome to the stage.
Okay. So, hi, I'm Kira, this is Sky, and we're both Django developers, but today we're here to talk to you about pen testing. So, we want to tell you how two ordinary, completely ungifted, self-taught developers can get into pen testing and why we think you should try to. Before we move on, the slides are up on our GitHub for anyone who needs to follow on their own device. So, we care about security. We think it's interesting, we worry about our users, but more than that, Sky and I need to care about security because in our own time, for love, we run a free, not-for-profit, zero-budget application that supports activist groups. So we need to. And we think this is a pretty common problem across Django and across other communities, so we wanted to share our solution. So before we do, a few caveats. We're not security professionals. We're just developers. And we can't make you a security professional either, so I hope you get something out of the talk, but don't go updating your LinkedIn profile just yet. Okay, and we don't want to talk anybody out of using professional security services. So if you have access to professional securities, either in a prevention team, in a local team, or as pen testers, please use them. But we don't all have access, and so we think it's pretty valuable for developers to learn anyway. So what the next 20 minutes will look like? I'm going to tell you what penetration testing is. Sky's going to tell you why we think you should learn it. We'll both show you what it looks like to use it with a Django app in a BDD test suite, and we'll tell you a little bit about how you can start learning. So what is it? So it's short for penetration testing. And like any other tech issue, there are a lot of opinions, there's a lot of different definitions. We're going to be talking about it at its most basic, and what we generally agree on is that it includes these 4 things. So a scan of your application for vulnerabilities. This can be automated or a code review or a mixture of both, but it includes a scan. Ooh. Skipping ahead. Attacking to exploit those vulnerabilities and prove that they exist, because you can get some false positives. With the purpose of securing your app, and with the permission of the owner of the app. And those last 2 are really important. We've already heard a few laughs. If you don't have those, you're just hacking. It's probably illegal. There will probably be consequences. You'll probably get caught. Just don't do that. And the last thing to keep in mind with the definition is what it isn't. So it's not perfect. It's not a security panacea, especially when done by an amateur, however enthusiastic. So be careful. And there's a really good quote I like that explains this. So I'll let you read it. So for anyone who can't quite see it, it says, if you fail a penetration test, you know you have a very bad problem indeed. If you pass a penetration test, you don't know that you don't have a very bad problem. That aside, we think it's absolutely worth doing, and Sky's going to tell you why.
So why should we, as developers, learn to pen test? Developer unemployment is low. Pretty much every developer who's looking for a job manages to find one fairly easily. Generally speaking, we have more work to do than we have time to do it in. And our tech is constantly changing. We're constantly having to learn about new tech and existing tech as it changes, just to stay relevant in the jobs that we do. And because we're so busy, our clients and our bosses really aren't pushing us at the moment to learn pen testing or these sorts of security skills. So why is it worth our time to put in the effort to learn yet another new thing? Well, we think there are a lot of really good reasons to do this. And the first is knowledge. So knowing about what vulnerabilities are, how they work, how they're exploited, what they look like, puts us in a really good position not to create them in the first place as developers when we write code. Django does a great job of protecting us from introducing most sorts of vulnerabilities into our code, at least when we're doing the fairly sort of vanilla basic tasks. But the more complex our code gets, the less able Django is to protect us from every single vulnerability that we can introduce. So if we know what the vulnerabilities are, what they look like, we're in a much better position not to introduce them into our code. And there's budgets. So we all know that there's a lot of money floating around in tech right at the moment. But like the rest of society, that money's not evenly distributed. Outside the hot startups and the unicorns, the rest of the internet runs on a budget. And most of those budgets don't include as much money for security as they possibly could or should. And so if as developers we can pick up some pen testing tools, some pen testing skills, we're in a position to improve the security of our code without necessarily being able to control the budgets. And there's fun. So just ask any little kid. Breaking stuff is fun. And at its most basic, that's what pen testing is about. It's about breaking stuff. So it's a lot of fun, and it's interesting as well. And then on the flip side of fun, we've got fear. So who here wants to be responsible for a data breach on a project or an app that you work on? And of course, that's a rhetorical question because none of us want to be. So learn some pen testing, do some pen testing, and you can relax a little bit more about the quality of the code when it comes to a security perspective. One of the unexpected consequences that we found of learning pen testing was that it actually improved the overall quality and cleanliness of our code. So pen testing tools interact with your app in ways that you as developers and we as developers wouldn't expect. They do things that ordinary human users just wouldn't think to do. And so as a result, they turn up not just security vulnerabilities and security issues, but they turn up just plain boring bugs as well. So when we run pen testing tools over our code, it crashes it, which is great because when you know about a bug, you can fix a bug. And you can fix it at a time that's convenient to you rather than at a time when it pops up unexpectedly. So pen testing not just gives us more secure code, but it gives us better quality, cleaner code as well. And then there's empathy, because we care about our clients and our users. Sure, they're the ones that find weird ways to break our apps, but they're also the people that pay our wages, and they're the reasons that we have the jobs that we have. So when we talk about security, we're really talking about the security of our users, because it's the users whose accounts are compromised when something goes wrong. It's the users whose data and credentials leak. And in the worst cases, it's the users whose identities are stolen and whose computers are ransomwared. So they're the reasons that we do what we do, and we want to make sure that bad things don't happen to them. And then we get responsibility, which is the main motivation for Kira and I in terms of learning pen testing. So it's 2019, and software is infrastructure now. Before we were developers, I was in construction engineering, Kira worked in the public sector. When we look at software, we look at it the same way that we look at a bridge or a government. Our lives and our societies rely so heavily on software, and we're the people that build it. And so we have a really good, possibly a unique perspective on how important it is that it be secure. which means that we need to act before necessarily anyone else is telling us that we need to try and make our software as secure as we can. And Bruce Schneier has a quote that puts it really well. And he says, "This is bigger than computer security. Technology now permeates society in a way it didn't just a couple of decades ago. That means that technologists now are relevant to all sorts of areas that they had no traditional connection to. Climate change, food safety, future of work, public health, bioengineering, and there are more."
So what does it look like? Hopefully you're convinced that you want to go do it, but what does it actually look like to use pen testing tools with the Django app? So it can be using something manually, and there's a lot of tools. You can integrate it with your BDD test, which is what we do, or you can even integrate it with CI/CD if you've got that going on. So for us, we are using Zap, which I'll explain in a second, integrated with BDD tests. And to show you what it looks like, we've actually built an intentionally vulnerable Django app, which we'll show you at the end, that you can use to test it, that includes the BDD tests and the integration tools that you need to get Zap working. Okay, so introducing Zap, or Z-Attack Proxy. So it's a free open source tool from OWASP, which is the Open Web Application Security Project. We like it because it fits nicely with automated BDD tests. It gives clear, actionable alerts. It's quite easy to see what it is that's gone wrong. And we're busy, and it saves us time from learning a full set of manual red teaming skills. So I'll get to how it works in a second, but what does it actually do? So it scans your app, it does a spider, it finds all the URLs, it checks the code over for vulnerabilities, and then it attacks your code. So it pretends to be a user, it puts in all sorts of weird input, and you get alerts. So the alerts look like this. You probably can't read it, that's fine. But it has color coding for the severity of each alert, and if you were to click on one of those, it shows you what the issue is, the request and response where the issue was generated, the HTML that was generated when it happened, so you can check that it really did happen. And it also has links back to OWASP resources, so you can understand how to remedy the problem. And if you get to the end of a scan, it also puts all of these alerts together in one document so that you've got a report of all of the problems. So that's pretty useful in a team if you need to share it. And so how does it work? So it's an intercepting proxy. So for those who aren't always across it, when someone's using the internet, it looks a bit like this. So there's a user using a browser, the browser's communicating with the server's serving the app's content. And Zap goes in between as a proxy between the browser and the server. So it can see and analyze all of the traffic between the browser and the server. And when it's doing that, it's looking for vulnerabilities, and it's called a passive scan. But it can also run active scans or attacks. And that looks like this. So when it's running active scans, it's impersonating a user, and it's cutting the browser out of the picture. Okay, and again, you can't read this, you're not supposed to. This is just to explain it's really powerful. And it's fairly complex. It has a lot of options. It has menus, submenus, sub-submenus. It's extremely configurable. But to their credit, they've also made it really easy to use as a person with no prior experience. So you can use it through the GUI. And that's as simple as giving it a URL, pressing the attack button, and waiting for your report. It's really very simple, which is great. And if you want to go further than that, further than a manual, you can do what we've done. And it has Python bindings, so you can script it pretty easily. And a quick note, for this section, we're going to be talking about testing. If you don't know anything about testing, don't stress, we'll get back to more beginner content at the end. Okay, so for those who do know, this is a pretty ordinary testing workflow. So we use Behave. It starts the test, it runs the BDD tests. Selenium is running our WebDriver, running Firefox, and we're using Djangocon. And so we just slip Zap in between Firefox and Djangocon. We start it with Behave, and we start it in as a proxy. It's really important to know you need to start it before you run the BDD tests. That's an important tip, because Zap learns about your app while it watches the traffic. So you want to show it what your app does and where all the pages are. It will spider, but you get a lot better results if you let it watch your tests. And the last thing is we serve it over HTTPS. So that's one of the reasons we're using Djangocon here, because you want to test your app as close as it is to production. So that's one reason. But also because you get a lot of false positives in your Zap alerts if you are testing on HTTP. Okay. So it's not trivial to get it set up, but it's not too difficult either. It's mostly about connecting things up. So this is the part where we're reaching for those developer tools, the string, the duct tape, the copy paste. So
I'm going to talk about how you bring Zap into an existing BDD test suite, like the one we've just shown you. The Django app that Kira mentioned has Zap coming in a single commit. So what I mean by that is that we built it so that we had a Django app with a set of BDD tests, and then in a single commit on top of that, we brought in everything that brings Zap into your app. So we're essentially trying to sort of give people something that is a bit of a template for the projects that you might have to show you exactly how to bring Zap in one sort of easy movement. And we're about to show you some code snippets, which are based on the Django Go app, but they're simplified down quite a bit so that they fit on the projector screen and so that we don't have to explain them in too much detail. Behave has an environment.py file, which gives it instructions for how to run BDD tests and what to do before and after. And in that environment.py file, you'll find a before all function. If you're familiar with Behave at all, then you're probably already using this to start up your browser automation. And you can see on the last line there, that's what we're doing with starting Firefox. But we also slot Zap in just before that. You can see the start Zap function. So that's the first thing we need to do. We need to start Zap up, and here's how we do it. It's really simple, 2 lines. So we use Python's subprocess module to kick Zap off. That's the zapproxy command that you can see there. You can pass it in with or without the daemon flag that you can see second in that list. To start with, it's probably a good idea to leave that off, because then you can see the Zap window running and you can see exactly what it's doing. But once you've got everything tuned up and working well, then you might as well take that out so that it gives you a clearer screen. The second line there, you can see a sleep statement, because Zap doesn't block when it starts running, so we just need to give it a few seconds to get started before we kick off the next process, which is our browser automation. So this is the start Firefox function, and it's probably similar to one that you've got in your BDD test already if you're doing that. But there's a difference, and that's the comment in the middle that you can see there that says set proxy config here. So because Firefox has to proxy through Zap, we need to add in the proxy settings the way we've done there. There's a bit to that, so we've cut it out from this slide. But if you go to the Django Go app, you'll see exactly how we do it. And so that's all we need to do to get things running before the BDD test. So we've got Zap running, we've got Firefox started. Actually, I should mention, there's a lot of instructions on the web for the old way to set up proxying with Selenium. And a lot of those won't work now with Firefox. So you need to do it the way that we do it in Django Go. Just check out the code there and you can see some function code. So once this all starts up, Zap runs the Behave tests, the BDD test rather. And then once they finish, it goes looking, Behave goes looking for the after all function. And this is where we kick off the Zap scan. This is much oversimplified, but it shows you the key points of what we're doing when we start Zap up. So the first couple of lines there, you can see we're just connecting to Zap using the Python bindings and giving it the URL of our app. And then we kick off Zap's spider. So our BDD tests have run and Zap's been watching them go. So it's got a pretty good idea of what the URLs are for our app. But our BDD tests may not have had every single URL in the app. And so we get Zap to run the spider, and the spider just picks up any loose ends, any URLs that it didn't see as the BDD tests were running. And then we run the active scan, the Zap active scan. And this is kind of the heart of Zap's functionality. So it's essentially impersonating a malicious user and trying to break your app. And the active scan will run for anywhere between a few minutes and a few hours, depending on the size of your app. and depending on how aggressive the settings are for the scan. So then you'll see the last couple of lines, we're just writing out a report once the active scan finishes. And that's it, and that's the test finished. So let's have a quick look now at Djangocon, because as Kira mentioned, we set that up to run over HTTPS. And luckily, it's a pretty simple thing to do, so you can do it in 2 lines. The first line there generates a self-signed SSL cert and key, and then the second line passes it into Djangocon. Once that's done, you'll have your app up and running over HTTPS. Now looking at Zap. So Zap is not built specifically for Django or for any framework. And that means that to use it with Django, we need to sort of tune it a little bit with a couple of customization scripts. And we've written these and saved them into the Django Goat project where you can look at them. There's essentially 2 things that we need to customize. One is the way that Zap handles authentication. So the first script does that for Django. And the second is the way that it handles CSRF and interaction with forms. And that's what the second script does. We don't have time to go into exactly how those scripts work at the moment, but they're there in the Django Goat project for you to look at. And that brings us to the next point, which is that you don't need to reinvent the wheel to bring Zap into your projects. It's taken us a fair bit of time and research and trial and error to get all this to work properly, but we've distilled down everything that we've learned into the Django Goat test suite. And so everything there is connected together and working well. And it's there on GitHub for you to use as an example or sort of a template so that you can know how to bring Zap into your existing test suite.
Okay. Ooh, wrong way. So where do you get started? First, we want to talk about when you want to get started. If you plan to do this, the time to get started is now or as soon to now as possible. The last thing you want to do is have to do something like this and learn all of the extras just after a breach because somebody has tasked you with finding what happened. So do it now when it's just a normal level of dysfunction. It's true. So, and how should you start? So if you haven't already seen them before, we highly recommend reading the OWASP Top 10. So for anyone who hasn't heard of it, it comes out every few years. The most recent one was 2017. And they do a review of the web, and they tell you the top 10 most common vulnerabilities in web applications. Includes things like SQL injection and cross-site scripting, a whole bunch of others. 8 others. What's useful is it goes into detail about what that looks like, how to work out whether your application might be vulnerable to it, and how you might fix it. It's all pretty great. Obviously, we also recommend OWASP's Z-Attack proxy. If you are going to start that on your own, we also suggest that you use the video tutorials. They are a lot easier to follow than some of the written documentation. It's good, but the videos are easier. And in particular, you should look up Simon Bennett's. His are the clearest. And the testing guide. So anyone in charge of tests, if you plan on integrating any type of penetration testing into your existing CI/CD, we definitely suggest reading the testing guide. It's 224 pages, it's not exactly a quick read, but it does go through all of the different testing methodologies that you might use and why you would integrate tests into certain parts of your life cycle, so it's worth doing. Okay, and you can try our app. So Django Goat. So it is at our GitHub, we'll put the link on at the end. It has a broken branch and a fixed branch, so you can see what we've done, and we've added each vulnerability in a single commit, so you can actually see what we broke. And it has all the integration tests. So we invite you to have a look at it, run scans on it, see what you're doing, mine it for code, whatever you like. And something to note, it explains each vulnerability in an amount of detail. It tells you where in the code we broke something, and it links itself back to the OWASP Top 10 documentation and sometimes to the Django documentation where it's relevant, so you can see what we've done. And it has instructions. We think it's beginner-friendly and junior-friendly. If you have any trouble, though, just get in contact. We're available. And come to our workshop. So we're running a workshop that teaches you how to do this hands-on on Sunday, right here. And just as a coincidence, our next 2 slides are almost exactly the same as Carlton's from yesterday. We didn't rip them off, it's just great minds thinking alike. So you are good enough. We really do think so. We are self-taught, we are not special, we're not even specialist developers, we're not gifted, and we've managed to learn how to do this. You are good enough, you can learn how to do this. You can do it. So pen testing, that is, although probably you're good at lots of other things. So that's it. So you can contact us via Twitter. We're Red and Black Tech. This is our GitHub. We only have 2 projects. You will find Django and also the conference slides if you'd like them. And so that's it. We'd like to say thank you.
Thank you very much, Kira and Sky. We have time for a couple of questions. So if you do have questions, find your way to the microphone. Or if there are any on the internet, you don't want to ask the question yourself, you can jump on the Slack channel or you can jump on Twitter. But it looks like we're going to have someone at the microphone. So here we go. Yep.
Yeah. Thanks for the talk. I wanted to ask, how do you run it on iterative manner, like in continuous integration? Because it took a lot of time to perform all this check-in, scanning, etc. So some points about this.
So if you've already...
One second.
Thought I left that on. That's up now, isn't it? Okay. If you've already got, we make the assumption that there's already an existing BDD test suite that you have, and so presumably that runs through your CI and you just integrate it into that. It just bolts directly into your existing BDD tests.
That's it. So we don't use Jenkins, but we understand that there are Jenkins. There's a Jenkins integration toolbox somewhere. So, sorry.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
Hi there. I would like to know the following. I would, of course, want to do the penetration test to my real system because I want to know if the real system, the production system, is secure. But on the other hand, penetration testing is about penetrating the system. So how can you solve this contradiction and perform the tests without breaking your site?
So our answer to that is if you need a penetration test on your real production database, leave that to the experts. We would not recommend using an automated tool because, among other things, it does attack, it might drop tables, it might inject all sorts of stuff, it will create users, it makes a huge mess. So, and actually, if you come to the workshop, we'll go into it, but 2 things to note just briefly. Yes, don't use it on a production server. Don't use it on anyone else's server. So we run it locally, we run it on localhost, that's what we suggest you do. If you have a test server, feel free, but even then. And the most important thing is you need to use a proxy if you set it up manually. If you set it up with our script, it's fine. If you use it manually, make sure you're using a proxy on your browser or your IP will be banned from your servers and potentially from all of Cloudflare. So be careful. So yeah, don't do it on your direct production database.
Yes, but then how far is this a valid test? If you do it locally, is that really comparable to the live situation? I mean, can I then really be sure that No. So it's not comparable, no. And I think if you're really worried, that's where we need to pay. It's a stopgap for people who don't have any budget. Thank you so much.
That's okay.
Thank you for the excellent presentation. This model of presentations as 4 hands is really wonderful. My question is, obviously in a small team, a startup, a single project, the programmers have to be the one-man band and do everything. In a more structured companies where we have a QA team, in which side should land the responsibility for the pen tests? Programmers should do it and deliver it to the QA team like they have nothing to do in an ideal world, or programmers should be doing the unit tests and leave the rest for the QA team.
Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure we think it should be developers' responsibility. I think if you're in a big enough place where you've got a QA team, I think this is fairly clearly in their wheelhouse. And if you've got a security team, it's obviously theirs. But I think part of our argument is that it's worth learning anyway, just for your own skill development, because you see things that you maybe only hear about theoretically otherwise, but it's also quite fun. You actually get to conduct yourself a SQL injection attack, see if it works. It's pretty good.
Out of time now, so thank you very much, and thank you, Kira and Sky.
Thank you.
Care. It's handling sensitive data like database passwords, tokens to third-party APIs, etc. It's also sharing settings between your team members, and as we all know, Django settings is a regular Python code, so it could have some tricky and unobvious logic. There are different approaches to solve these issues, so let's briefly talk about the most popular ones. So settings local approach, it's maybe the most simplest and the most older thing. So you split your settings to base settings in settings.py and environment specific settings to settings local.py. This approach partially solves the issue with sensitive data, but still it has a lot of disadvantages. So the next approach is separate settings file for each environment. With this approach, you separate your settings by environment. Still, you have this base file, so it's like an extension of previous method. And it's solved this issue with different environments there in version control system, and it's easy to share settings between developers, but still you need somehow handle secret data, and still you have this inheritance. The next approach is environment variables, and this is just some basic example and has some issues, so let's have a look on advanced example. Instead of using auth.environ directly, it's better to write some wrapper and to handle k error, and also you can add their default values and type conversion, but it's better to use a third-party application. We will talk about it later in several slides. So this approach has a lot of advantages. Finally, we have configuration separate from code. You have environment parity between all your servers. There is no inheritance. And also there is a theoretical grounding for using environment variables for configuration. It's 12 factors. So 12 factors, it's a collection of recommendation to build web apps to be easily deploy and scale in cloud. It was created by Heroku, a well-known cloud hosting provider. And in terms of this talk, we are interested in configuration factor, which literally says that we need to use environment variables for this. So if you're not familiar with 12-factor, I strongly recommend you to check their website. They have really clear explanations for each factor and architecture all in all. And now let's go back to the tooling, and we found that Django Environ, it's a very convenient app. It has a really nice API that handles all type conversion, default values, etc. So let's have a look on examples. That's how your settings look before. That's how they look after applying Django Environ. So the code became clearer and more readable. So please check this up. Several words about structure. We recommend to split your settings, but not by environment, but by groups. And in this case, you can differentiate it Django, third party, and your custom settings. And if your project will be growing, you can implement each of these files as a package and split it more granularly. And as we all know, naming variables is the most hardest part of the development, so this works as settings too. We cannot imply on Django or third-party settings, but we can follow these simple rules for our custom settings. So let's give them meaningful names, use prefix with the project name for our custom settings, and write descriptions. So let's quickly summarize. Keep settings in environment, don't hard code, split settings into group, and follow naming conventions. This is the link to slides and other resources. Also, please check article on our blog site. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Our next speaker is Seth. Seth, if you can jump up on stage and get ready. I arrived in Denmark for the first time on Tuesday, and on the train coming in from the airport, I actually had started a really interesting conversation with a local who told me a bit of history about a Spanish gentleman who came to live in Denmark named Juan, who's come down and become very, very well known in Denmark. For the impact that he's had on politics and sort of the Danish way of life. Juan was just universally loved by his neighbours. He was just a quiet guy, lived by himself, kept to himself, but was just a model for what a citizen should be. You know, came from Spain, came to live in Denmark, became a model citizen, and everyone was sort of wondering how does he get to be such a good citizen? Are we ready? Do we have slides? No. No, we still don't have slides yet. Okay, his next door neighbour sort of found out about Juan first and came over and had a bit of a chat with him and sort of find out what was going on, and learned this really, really valuable lesson, and took it back and started to live his own life following the same rules and patterns that Juan had taught him in this really, really simple conversation that had happened. And again, sort of the message started going. All of a sudden, there was two people living next door to each other that were living the best possible life, and everybody around them started to notice that here are two very, very happy people living the best model of what it is to be a Dane in the modern world. We're still going? Still waiting for slides? Okay. Yes, we have slides now. All right, so we will continue the story of Juan after Seth Yastrov talks to us about type checking your Django. Thank you.
Hi, I'm going to talk about type checking your Django project. So if you don't know, Python has type annotations added since Python 3, and you can also put them in. You can also put type annotations in your Python 2 code with some type comments. MyPy is a type checker. You can install it, and let's say you have a function and you want to annotate the argument and return type. You can call it with the wrong type, in this case string, although it should be an int. You get an error. So that's great. But what if you want to type check your Django code? Well, there are stub files which define the interface for all sorts of Django functions, classes, and so on. It's a project on GitHub by Maxim Kornikov, and other people have contributed as well. You can just pip install it to your project. So let's say I made a Django project, and I want to type check it with MyPy. So I make a MyPy INI file and add in some options and then run it, and I get this error about need some type annotation, something in the settings. Let's see, and if I add this plugin to this config, the plugin comes with the stubs, it will not complain. And this plugin, it does some cool magic stuff so that you can actually type check some of the cool Django features like the ORM. So if you try to construct some object model and it doesn't have actually the attribute you're using, it will tell you about that. Let's say you have a character field on your model and you try to pass it a none, but it's not nullable, it will complain about that. Let's say you have, let's say you have a relation to a foreign key, to a related model, and you try to access that on another model and access a field on that. It will also be able to follow that relation and type check that field. So in this case, you can't add an integer to a string, this name on the publisher. And finally, a more complicated example, if you are using this values list function to get, in this case, just one value from a query as your result, in this case, the name field of this person model, then you should get a string back, but because you are only asking for the first row, you might get a none back if the row didn't exist. So actually, if you try to pass this to a function that takes a string, it will complain because it might actually be none, and we had a strict optional setting enabled on MyPy. So this is very cool. There are also non-ORM stuff, these stubs. There are stubs for pretty much all of Django, but it's probably not entirely correct or incomplete because a lot of it was generated with some tools. Yes, thanks. If you have a custom settings module, you can also specify that in a config file, and it will understand that. And you can contribute at GitHub. It's actively developed, and there's also a Gitto channel. And there's also a related plugin and stubs if you're using Django REST framework. So where to go from here? The project has some tests actually on type checking the Django tests itself, which they don't all pass, so there's some things ignored. But if more of them pass, then it kind of shows that it's pretty legit, or at least pretty accurate in not giving false positives. And you guys should try it out on your projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Well, our next speaker gets set up. So Juan has told his next door neighbour about this great secret, and now we've got two people living their best lives, their best Danish lives. They then start, the people in the rest of the street, they notice this is going on, and so they come over and they say, so, you know, what's the big secret here? And Seth and, Juan and his neighbour both share this one little short secret about how to live your best life. And so okay, we're ready. So our next speaker is François Séguin. Take it away.
Hey, bonjour, hi, my name is François Séguin. My Twitter handle is Holdy. It's not an Indian restaurant in Liverpool, in case you see some mentions. I work at Polyconseil, we're in Paris, a company which, among other things, we make information systems behind electric vehicle charging and car sharing systems such as Source London and Blue LA in Los Angeles. So switched careers actually a year ago. I've been working at Polyconseil for 6 months, and my mission at the moment is how to implement privacy by default in an existing Django app. So we have 1 million lines of code, approximately. So I couldn't afford to do it by hand and manually. I'm not crazy, and I'm very lazy. So also, if I missed anything, that could cause a very bad personal data leak. So I'll take an example in logs. For example, what if we logged something very badly? A customer would edit their details. So we have an email address, we have a phone number, birth date, some additional details. What we wanted was something with redacted values, something that would be anonymized or pseudonymized. So the solution we came to was, for instance, an example with strings. I have a variable that is a name, it's a string, the value is Jean-Michel, it's very French. And what we do is we wrap it, we give it an alternative value, and it turns into a different object that has an original value, Jean-Michel, and an alternative value which is redacted. So what we do then is we wrap the callables. For instance, if I want to print the name, the object will call the dunder str method. And this the method has been redefined to check the context. Am I supposed to show the original value or show an alternative value? If it's supposed to be redacted, then I return redacted. And of course, if not, I return Jean-Michel. So next, for the fields, in the database, we have a lot of customers. So we have, for instance, a table with a type of varchar with Jean-Michel. And I have this new field now. So I need to define a new mixin. And this mixin just redefines two methods from DB value. So from the database, we wrap the value, and the pre-save method that unwraps the value from the field to the database. We also have a model mixin, which just redefines the dunder method setHatch to wrap the value of fields that contain personal data. So if I do customer.name equals Jean-Michel, this is the method that is called. And to help with all of that, I have two context decorators. So it's both a decorator and a context manager at the same time. Hide personal data and show personal data. And we can imbricate them. So remember, we had the logs at the beginning. So a very quick recap about logging. I have a message, I have a level. I give it to my Python object, a logger, and which has several handlers, maybe. A handler can be logged to a file or to the console, or send an email, whatever. And I can add a formatter. So what I do is, when I don't want to show the personal data, I just use a decorator on the formatter. If I, for some reason, want to show the personal data, I can use the other decorator. And this is how I can obtain this very nice redacted log. So what are the next steps? Obviously, this is very, very, very simplified. There's room for improvement. And the next step is, of course, open sourcing. I still have 1 minute. So as a bonus, also we have custom template tags. How do we do that? In the template node, we check a permission to see if we should show or hide the value. And this template tag can be used with filters. So for instance, I can do a hello with the customer name. I just need to give it the variable with a filter, in this case an uppercase filter, and give it the permission. The condition. It also works with a form, and I can just add a bootstrap filter if I want to. If you don't know what GDPR is, it's a little late, but there was an amazing talk last year at Djangocon Europe 2018. It was by Will Hardy. It was called Protecting Personal Data with Django, because it's the law. And this is for me, all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Francois. And bonus points for having a hyphen in someone's name. I like it. All right, so Juan has converted his entire street and taught the entire street about this simple message about how to live your best life. And it doesn't take long before, when something like that happens, that the government finds out. And so the local city found out about it, and they were interested in finding out about this message. We'll find out a little bit more about that after Sasha Romain introduces us to a different secret. Take it away, Sasha.
Thank you.
So if you've seen me around, or if you've been to more Djangocons, you may have seen me hand out these delicious little cookies called stroopwafels. I bring them from Amsterdam. They're like 2 waffles with some gooey sweet syrup in between. Very tasty. I've been doing this for a long time. I've been bringing them to Djangocon for years at least. So far I've been involved in handing out about 56 kilograms of these cookies, of which 16 kilo was sugar. So I've contributed about 255 million calories of stroopwafel to open source communities. This is enough for an adult to live on for 6 months, but you would not feel well. And then there's also the secret society of the stroopwafel, which started some years ago. And you can actually become a member. There's a small initiation ritual, and then you can get your hand stamped with our logo. The secret is I don't actually know how many members there are because the stamp fades after a day, so I can't keep track. I think we have about 300. And why am I doing all of this? Like when I meet new people here also, they ask like, you know, what is the deal with the stroopwafels in the Django community? And I do it because it's just really fun. Because like, you know, when I meet people for the first time, sometimes they're initially a little wary, like strange person from Amsterdam, handing out some food. I get asked a lot whether there's weed in it. And, you know, people who know me, they sometimes get really enthusiastic. Like, I've had people run down the hallway when they saw me again to ask whether I brought any stroopwafels. And so the fun is mainly in, like, how enthusiastic people get about this, because these cookies cost me about 6 cents. So, you know, it's not like a major effort. And basically, the reason is, for me, like, it's not just about the cookie, or I don't think it's just about the cookie for these people. It is also bringing them a little bit of happiness. It's a random gesture of kindness, even though it's small, and that matters to people. So, in a way, the secret society of the stroopwafel is actually the secret society of happiness. And when we think about happiness, we often talk about often think about very big things, about your life partners, about getting married, about children, about moving to a different country. And if you recognize the colors on my shirt, you'll know I know some things about big changes. But we often tend to forget how it can also come from really tiny things. That really small acts of kindness, small gestures, can make a really big difference. They can make someone feel better after they've had a bad day, or something happened, or they're just not feeling so well. Small things can add up for them. And one of the ways in which you can contribute to this is a project Mikey mentioned earlier, open source happiness packets, which is basically a platform where we try to get people, mainly in open source, to say nice things to each other. So if you saw a talk from a speaker that you really liked, or you had a conversation with someone that made you feel good, or you learned something, or it cheered you up, then you can send them a happiness packet. We've had 930 cents since we first launched this in Budapest. And a lot of them are public also. And so some of my favorites include, it is people like you that make me truly happy to be involved in open source. These are public with permission. And you all deserve way more praise and accolades than I can possibly give. And there are another 100 public on the website. So we've had 930 cents, and there are enough people here that I'm sure we could get to 1,000. I'm sure there are a lot of people here who've met someone that they appreciated, something that somebody did for them. Maybe it was a conference organizer, maybe a speaker, a volunteer, anyone really. But also, like, happiness packets are not the only way. There are so many small acts that we can do that maybe we don't even think about so much ourselves, that don't take so much effort, but they can make a big difference to everyone else, to someone else. Don't all start bringing unhealthy foods, because that doesn't scale, but there are many ways. So my name is Sasha. I've been called the monarch of stroopwafel-based happiness. Please join the secret society of happiness.
Thank you, Sasha. While our next speakers get set up. So Juan has been been called on by the state, by this local city government. They've invited him into a meeting. Juan goes into this meeting so that he can help share this message about how he lives his best life, the message that he shared with his neighbours and the rest of the people on his street. And the government's really, really interested about this and wants to expand the program. We'll find out more about what they did after Karina and Jessica talk to us about PyNAM Scholars.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Jessica, and I want to talk to you about PyNAM Scholars. PyNAM Scholars is a subgroup of the Python Namibia Society, and they are Python coding clubs in high schools. Okay, so one of the things that we have always been struggling with is computers. So this picture was taken at one of our Friday classes. We have 2-hour classes on every Friday, except for when it's school holiday or when the kids are going home. So we have always struggled with computers, as I just said, and we have done plenty of things to overcome this or be able to practice even without computers. So what I want to say that I have not really said in a lot of talks that I've had is to thank the Cardiff University, because they've always, when they have a representative coming to PyCon Namibia, they've always brought at least one computer that they are not using. So, and that's one of the computers that we are using there. So we share them. We have 4 now, and we share them. Some break and so forth, but currently we have 4 that are working. So I want to send them a special thank you. So one of the things that we do is what we call Computer Day. I've spoken a lot about this, or extensively about this, at Djangocon Europe 2018. So if you want to know how we do it and know in depth about it, you can watch the video online on YouTube. So what we have been trying to do this year, what we are trying to plan to do, is that we extend it to be a 6-day training instead of just a 2-day conference. Because we have had schools from villages that joined the society, and we don't want them to come all the way just to come for a 2-day conference. So we want to change it and extend it for 6 days. So if you want to be involved in terms of coming to be a mentor or a tutor or teach about something in Python, we are more than happy to have you on the team and collaborate with you. Yeah, so we have had 6 schools now this year that joined the society. So we are quite happy about that. And that's one of the schools in the north. And that's what happened after we drove 13 hours to go to that school. So that's why we want to extend Computer Day to be a 6 days thing instead of just 2 days. Right, so one of the things that happened this year is also that we finalized a partnership with NSDO and ASB Hamburg. So NSDO is the Namibia Stand Development Organization. So they give mattresses, school desks, used computers that are donated by ASB Hamburg. And I heard about them through, I've been a teacher for 3 years, and I heard about them through a parent because I was always complaining about the lack of computers at the school and things like that. And then she introduced me to this guy. So when I spoke to him, he told me, no, we give computers to primary schools, and we give computers to schools that are dominated by the San community because they are marginalized. And so after a few meetings, I convinced him to give computers to schools that are not dominated by the San community and secondary schools. So this year we had our final meeting, and we met the ASB Hamburg group, and we are now going to receive computers from them. So they are going to be, let's say, giving a full computer lab or like 20 computers to a school, and then we give them like an amount of money to help them cover the cost that they incur when the computers come. So Namibia has about 1,000, they have more than 1,700 schools, so we have a long way to go. They are not going to help. So we have had a couple of things that we also try to do that we've been doing to try and raise funds. And Karina will be talking to you a little bit more about that. I met her at Djangocon Europe 2018, and she has helped me, especially with the emotional wording of things and things like that. So she's going to talk to you a little bit more about her ideas.
Hello, I'm going to talk more about the ways that we could help to contribute. Well, there is a Patreon link we will post it on Slack also, and you can donate directly here on the link. But also you could get more creative ways, could find more creative ways to do this. For example, well, I myself, pledged to give a free one-day beginner lesson for 3 people who in London who. So you can, but you can also do the same, but maybe something different, like guitar lesson, or you could make a plush Django pony, or maybe you have some other ideas to give as rewards for other people who donate to this project.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we have one last speaker. The local city government has found out about one. They've met with one. They've come up with a grand plan for, we can do this. This is actually quite a simple thing to do. But unfortunately, before they actually got to the point where they were able to deploy this grand plan out, Juan was abducted, and the abductors took him out to a golf course, and was there in the middle of the golf course, and they were trying to stop him because they didn't want the whole society to change. They liked things the way they were, and it was tense. There was yelling. Juan's a very nice guy, very calm guy, obviously living his best Danish life, and there was a struggle. And unfortunately, Juan was shot. And we'll find out what happened after that. After we have Christoph Bujanovich.
Hi, I'm Chris. You can find me on GitHub and Twitter with my handle @Bujnevich. I'm currently working at Plekto. I'm a senior software developer and head of Warsaw office. And I'm going to talk to you really quickly about keeping a request-wide state in Django. And that's not to be confused with global state, because global state is very bad. It lacks isolation. You can leak pretty much anything to another request. So for example, user data. And Django tries really hard to get rid of pretty much all instances of global state that are still there. And we should be striving to do as well in our applications. An example of request-wide state is, for example, internationalization in Django. So whenever we use the I18N framework, which includes also the middleware, we're actually not passing around the language around. We keep that in something that's called thread local storage. And as a matter of fact, it doesn't have any magic involved. It's just using a common Python construct in such a way that allows us to obtain and read the data from any point in our application, including library code, at any point in a request cycle. So a really quick code example is we can have a state file which just uses one simple import and a pair of getter and setter. And we can use that from middleware to set the object at the beginning of a request and then reset it at the end of the request. That's fairly important because we don't want to leak the data to later requests. And at any point after this middleware runs and before it returns, we can access the data. So you can put anything you need in the application, for example, library code or some custom code related to location and geographical bindings, for example, or maybe you want to keep the request itself, as in this example, for debugging purposes. Yeah, and you need to use it with caution. Please don't abuse that. You generally still want to pass variables around, like in normal, like any responsible programmer would do. That is pretty much still a global state, but it's bound to one request. So you just solve some issues with isolation, but it's still a bit messy and indirect way. it just helps resolve some issues. Okay, so that's it. I think we have 2 more minutes left. That was a quick one. Thank you.